Joe's birthday was yesterday. Had a party and they all had a great time. He liked the atomic gun you sent very much and plays with it all the time. Did I tell you I cut my hair? Looks awful. Love, Janet.
Well, eventually I did go to jail, you know. I was in jail for 6 months. Chetty was in jail 6 months, too.
What was that experience like?
Huh?
What was that experience like, being in jail?
It was nice. Both of us liked it because, you know, we got away from the hurly-burly. Oh, my God, people used to drive us, people drive you crazy. One of the hardest things in politics is everyone wanting to see you and talk to you, and they don't give you a chance sometimes.
When my father was in prison, he was with political prisoners. So they were treated a little bit better than the common prisoner. They weren't with the criminals and all of that. But when Mom went to prison, because she was the only female, they had her with the common prisoners, with prostitutes. And so I think her time in jail was a lot harder than, say, for my dad.
I remember them coming and digging up our yard for bombs. I remember sneaking my father on the blankets, and the cops, the troops would be checking the car when he was restricted. I remember my mother going to jail, coming out of jail, my father going to jail, waving at him in jail.
My father asked me to come and visit him because he had cancer and he felt he was dying. And I couldn't leave the city, so he died. It was terrible. Unfortunately, my husband and my father never met. They never met.
Forbes Burnham took advantage of the Jagans' weakened position. He broke away from the People's Progressive Party to form his own, primarily Afro-Guyanese party, the People's National Congress, or PNC. From that point onward, politics in Guyana became bitterly racially divided. Indians almost always vote for the PPP and blacks for the PNC.
Mr. Burnham, you were a former supporter of Dr. Jagan, and now you're the head of the main opposition party. I take it, however, that you still support him on socialism.
I describe myself and my party as democratic socialist, the non-communist left, whereas, I think Jagan is much more to the left than that.
The split was the worst thing that happened, and probably led to a lot of the problems we still have today.
Since 1955, Guyanese elections have split along racial lines. Would the 1997 contest be the same?
Well, I guess that isn't the pattern. We won't do well.
Still on the elections, as votes slowly trickled in, Janet hoped that she had won over Afro-Guyanese voters.
Neil Kumar just called. In Linden, we used to get 0% He's giving some results there now, shows that we may have between 20 to 25%.
Okay, well, that's about...
You said that?
Yes. I put my nose down to the chart. I have seen it. I've seen the trend. And we are now making inroads into the PNC in their traditional areas. This is going to be a mudslide. And that thing you said before.
How are you? All right, well, at 1:30, we have the TPP Civic leading with 22,999, with the PNC behind at 16,125. I guess most people will be sleeping by now, so we'll have to wait until in the morning.
Janet and Chetty continue to fight for a racially united and independent Guyana. Finally, in 1957, the British relented and allowed elections again. Chetty was elected chief minister, and Janet was appointed Minister of Labor, Health, and Housing.
We worked with the British because we were still a colony. They didn't allow us to do certain things, like foreign affairs was in the hands of the British, finance was in the hands of the British.
Chetty wrote, "With my wife leading the ministry, it was in the field of labor and health that we made our greatest gains. A scheme was launched to wipe out malaria. Children throughout the country were inoculated in an anti-polio campaign. An anti-typhoid scheme was launched. 14 health centers were completed. 21 new maternity and child care centers were established. Annual holiday pay was prescribed for clerks, domestics, and chauffeurs.
Not boasting, but I had a good reputation as a minister. I used to bring the bureaucrats into the districts and let them see what the needs of the people were. A lot of them never been outside the city of Georgetown. I used to take them with me all around. I used to go all over the country.
When we were little, I remember my mom would go back and forth up to Berbice by herself, driving at night with all the horrible things, and you have to pass through certain villages. The things that my mom did, she won't let me do. No. You know, the things that she did, I mean, she traveled this country up and down by herself.
Janet traveled throughout the length and breadth of this country. She did a lot of work. She did everything. She went to jail for Guyana.
Janet has what Janet has done for this country. No other woman
We got
Guyanese has done.
They used to call me Blue-Eyed Bauji, which meant, I'm not even blue-eyed, but it meant brother's wife. To them, Chetty is their brother, and I'm his wife. They built a lot of myths about me. They say I used to go around the countryside in a sari. I never did. How are you going to run around in a sari? But all kind of things they say that aren't true.
The extremely popular Chetty Jagan again easily won re-election in 1961. The Kennedy administration, recently stung by the humiliating failure of a CIA-sponsored invasion of Cuba at the Bay of Pigs, could not sit idly by. The U.S. government did not want another communist state in the West. Soon after the Guyanese election, Special Assistant Arthur Schlesinger Jr. sent President Kennedy a memorandum. It read, "State recommends a covert program to expose and destroy communists in British Guyana, including, if necessary, finding a substitute for Jagan himself."
I have never made any secret about my views. I have been thrown out of office. I have been subjected to violence, to indignity, and to jail. I am willing to face these things all over again, and gladly, if necessary, in the fight to free my people and to aid them. Here I stand. Here will I stand until I die.
Chetty went to Washington to ask President Kennedy for financial aid to support his struggle for independence. He also appeared on American TV.
Our guest today is Dr. Chetty Jagan, the newly elected and first premier of British Guyana, gateway to South America.
Mr. Prime Minister, are you or are you not pro-communist?
What I am interested in is to set up a democratic regime in British Guyana.
Do I understand then, by what you're saying, that you are neither a communist nor pro-communist, as we understand both words today in relationship to the Soviet Union, in relationship to communist China?
I believe I'm a socialist. I believe in a planned
Mr. Prime
economy.
Minister, you seem to be avoiding a direct answer on some of these questions. What is important, I think, for the people in this country to know, where do you stand on this fundamental division in the world today between communism and Western democracy?
I don't want to change imperialist masters for my country. I don't want to accept any aid which will in any way limit our sovereignty.
In the economic field, I do not believe in capitalism.
I'm not interested in any form of imperialism in British Guyana. You can put your tax, whether Russia has imperialism or America has imperialism or Canada has or England, that is for you to decide. I believe that I want to be left out of that.
May I ask you just a simple question? Are you or are you not?
I don't like this sort of either communist or West. You know, I think this tendency to see things in black and white is a tendency which can lead to a lot of harm.
In the 1960s, the CIA secretly funded strikes that crippled the country's economy. The agency also instigated race riots that left hundreds dead or injured. The Guyanese people, unaware of these covert actions, blamed Chetty.
They used to encourage and finance fires, killings all over the country. Became racial, Indians versus black. Large section of Georgetown was burned down.
People, you know, would pass by the house sometimes and scream things that, you know, negative things about him and stuff like that, but you learn to live with it.
Jagan must resign. We don't want him in politics. He's no good to our country. Break the Jagan. We want him to resign.
Well, I think they should ban Mr. Jagan from politics.
I always had a feeling that even though they were hostile to the PPP, people still had a high regard for Chetty. So rather than turn all their wrath on him, they turned it on me. In the 60s, I could not be seen for years. I couldn't be seen, or they'd start attacking, burning, killing. If I was seen, so I used to just move from my house to here and back. I couldn't go to a restaurant. I couldn't. If I visited someone and I was seen walking in, they'd besiege the house. So I had to just lie low for a long time. You know, it was disgusting in a way. I remember I had to go to a conference in Finland during that part. Oh, it was so wonderful to walk around the street and buy a hot dog, and you know, oh, that was marvelous. You couldn't do it here. You couldn't live a natural life.
The future of the world will be decided one way or another, whether people like me will achieve what they want to achieve, that is social change, economic emancipation, by peaceful means or by violent means. Because I have won 3 successive elections and there's no prospect of the opposition defeating me. This is their frustration in the future. If they, by rigging elections or doing anything, throw me out of government, then the only future here will be violence and trouble.
In the school, like where I went, it was predominantly Afro-Guyanese population, and so because of all the race wars that were going on during those years, the kids would pick on me, and I was physically beaten up a couple of times. I never told my parents for quite a while, and then probably it was too much to bear, and then I told my mom, and she finally had to take me out to the school.
The British were so disgusting. I had been getting a number of reports that something awful was going to happen at Wismar, and I spoke to the British Commissioner of Police over. I said, send reinforcements there, please protect the area, and he wouldn't listen to me. He did nothing, and then there was just a mass killing, and people had to jump in boats and come down the river. They burned out everyone's house. Every Indian was forced to leave. There was rape and murder. Oh, it was terrible. That became a real ethnic cleansing, as they call it. And then I resigned because he refused to take my advice on how to protect the area. That was awful.
A March 14, 1963 airgram from the U.S. Consulate General in Georgetown to the U.S. Department of State reads, Chetty Jagan might not possess nimbleness of intellect, but Janet Jagan can probably provide the intelligence needed to keep Chetty propped up.
My parents probably realized that things were really becoming very, very bad, and probably were worried for our safety and not knowing if something happened to them, what would happen to us. So I was sent to my Uncle Jim's, and my brother went to Barbados. I lived in Chicago for I think about 6 months. And when I returned back, my dad had already been removed from government.
Under pressure from the U.S., the British changed the Guyanese electoral system, ensuring Chetty's defeat in the 1964 election, even though he again received a majority of the popular vote. The U.S. backed Chetty's old rival, Forbes Burnham.
One might say the Americans, British, propelled Burnham into office, pushed them in, then, you know, sat aside and watched.
1966, with Chetty no longer a threat, the British finally granted independence to the colony.
The irony, of course, is that if you use the word worse, he was worse in quotation marks than their wildest dreams about us.
Have you talked to Forrest Burnham lately?
Oh, we talk, but Burnham is a very arrogant type and a person who feels that he can do anything and just do what he feels should be done.
During the 1970s and 1980s, Burnham transformed himself from an anti-communist socialist to a black power militant, and finally, to a de facto dictator.
It is not for me to tell you in which direction a bright future lies.
Burnham ruled Guyana for the next 28 years.
Those years were terrible. There's nothing done. They allowed the schools and the roads and the bridges and the hospitals, everything to decay. I'm only talking about the physical aspect, but there was a lot of terror in the land. People were denied their rights. People would be picked up and jailed, and searches were carried out.
The people were led to believe all they had to do was to put out the PPP from the government and they will get the sun and the moon, that milk and honey will flow in the streets. Well, the opposite has happened.
To stay in office, they rigged elections. And when I tell you rigged, they rigged many, many ways.
Under Burnham, officials routinely tampered with ballot boxes and the dead cast votes. In Jonestown, Guyana, 913 people committed mass suicide. Guyana became the second poorest country in the Western Hemisphere.
Everyone turned their head away and wouldn't recognize it, including the American press. American media never recognized that there was rigged elections. No one, the Caribbean, they all had a veil of silence over it. And even those talking all this stuff about democracy and this and that, they all carefully avoided examining this country.
4 days after the election, results were still not verified. Many Guyanese suspected election fraud.
My girl who works with me, she called me from there. Somebody pick up the ballot box and run away.
Okay, where the voter meant to put his vote. If it's on top, support on the pound. People were quarreling over the rejected votes.
You said what, right?
No, it's time to rile up.
All right, stuff.
Yeah, this guy just told me. Not rile up. They get in the
because of the election.
Yeah.
When are you going to give the results? Well, I wish I knew. We're going to get the results. Oh, you want a nice piece of cake? No? Okay. Bye. Bye-bye. You want me for anything?
No, you want.
I'll come back. I just want to get a little rest. As Nadira said, she called me, she said, you better get sleep. She said, if you were to collapse now, it'd be a scandal. It'd be scandalous.
Definitely.
You leaving now? You going home?
Yeah, I was going home.
In 1983, Janet wrote to my mother, "Things here are rough at every level, political, economic, social. I still work every day. I also do my own housework and cooking. Cooking is no easy task as so many foods are hard to get. Chetty is away just now but expected back in a few days. They had an awful rumor he was shot. How are the girls? Regards to Ed. Love, Janet."